Well, let's bring in David Swanson. He's the regional spokesperson for the UN's Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs. He joins me now via Skype from the Jordanian capital, Amman. It's good to have you with us live on Al Jazeera, Mr. Swanson. The de-escalation areas were signed up to by all sides in September, and they included Ghouta. Why are supplies not getting into that area in the manner that they should be?
Well, that's the big question, and something that we are continually asking others about. As you're well aware, the UN is deeply concerned for the safety and protection of the close to 400,000 men, women, and children in besieged eastern Ghouta. The situation is particularly difficult there, and we want nothing more than to bring assistance in where we can.
But who are you, sorry to interrupt, who are you actually, sorry Mr. Swanson, who are you asking those questions to? Because somebody is stopping the UN aid getting in. So who are you asking those questions to? Rebels or the government?
Okay. I think what's important for your viewer, I think what's important for you to understand is that we're dealing with a very complex and protracted crisis. So when assistance is being brought in, it's important for your viewers to understand what type of assistance is being brought in and how we actually do it. Now, inside Syria today, when we're trying to reach the areas of besiegement and hard-to-reach areas, we follow a module called interagency humanitarian convoys. In doing that, we have to work with the Syrian authorities as well as all parties to the conflict well in advance so that they logistically can bring this assistance in. It is a very, very long and arduous challenge, and we have been doing it for quite some time, but it's particularly difficult because it's not just one party to the conflict, you have to reach it to all parties.
But then medical, or should I say assistance, consists of both medical assistance and food assistance. How can anyone stop you bringing in assistance per se, because if it's required and it's needed, therefore, how can only a quarter of it have got into the area, certainly in Ghouta, as our report suggested, in the past, 6 months?
Well, you're absolutely right in that, and that's one of the big questions that we continue to ask. It's an incredibly challenging thing for the humanitarian community inside Syria to work with. All of the assistance that goes through, a lot of it is a very long logistical approval process in which assistance is approved. And even when the assistance and the relief items are put on trucks to go in, it is not uncommon for that assistance to be removed. So we are working in a very, very difficult.
Again, who is removing? Who is removing the? So we talk about assistance not getting in. The international community, the audience watching, not here, but on other media channels, sit back and say, "Oh, isn't this very sad?" But who's actually stopping the assistance getting in? And what type of assistance are we talking about? When we look at that report, we look at medical syringes, anaesthetic drugs, valves, and pipes that will be required in operational circumstances. Again, if that's a medical assistance, how can that be refused entry into an area that so desperately needs it, especially when we talk about hospitals that can't even treat the patients of that particular area, especially in Ghouta?
Well, you're absolutely correct, and there are increased reports of critical shortages of not just food, but also medical supplies and access to medical care in eastern Ghouta. So we obviously, as the international community, want to see that assistance go in. And so we are working around the clock and closely with our partners on the ground in coordination with all parties to ensure that assistance goes in. Now, the important thing to understand is that is an incredibly challenging and complex environment. So when the assistance is actually put forward for the approval process, it includes items like medical supplies. But unfortunately, sometimes those items are removed.
Very briefly, Mr. Swanson, what is your recourse? You obviously have problems getting the appropriate aid into the appropriate areas. Who do you go back to in terms of your bosses to say, hey, you need to speak to these politicians or these groups because they are not allowing this aid in? Who do you go back to and who do you expect answers from?
Well, what we always do is we are always working quietly behind the scenes and advocating with all parties to the conflict, as well as those who have influence on them. So what we want to do is make sure that people know that this assistance has to come through, and we remind people of their international obligation, law and human rights law, to allow this assistance, particularly items like medical supplies, as quite correctly pointed out, have to be brought through.
Well, for the moment, we'll have to leave it there. David Swanson, thank you very much for your time. Really appreciate your analysis of what's going on and the work that you have to do. Thank you very much.